April 26, 1943, 2 a.m. A bakery just outside the heavily fortified perimeter of Auschwitz. 3 men are hiding in the shadows of a back room. They aren't supposed to be here. Outside, SS guards patrol with automatic weapons and attack dogs. Searchlights cut through the pitch-black night. One of the prisoners steps toward a heavy iron door. He slips a duplicate key into the lock. The door swings open. They don't look back. They bolt into the dark. Within seconds, sirens pierce the night sky. Spotlights swing wildly. Gunfire erupts behind them, tearing the air to rags. Out of more than 1.1 million people who entered Auschwitz, only 144 ever successfully escaped. This man was one of them. But here is the terrifying twist. This man didn't just break out of Auschwitz. 3 years earlier, he voluntarily broke in. His name was Witold Pilecki, a Polish cavalry officer who allowed himself to be captured by the Gestapo just to infiltrate the world's most notorious death camp. But the most shocking part of his story isn't how he got in, or how he pulled off this impossible escape. It's the dark mystery of what happened next. Why did the Allied governments refuse to believe the horrifying secrets he brought out? And why, after surviving the absolute worst of the Nazi regime, did his own country reward his heroism by putting a bullet in the back of his head? To understand why a man would choose to enter hell, you have to look at who he was before the nightmare. Before he became prisoner 4859, Pilecki was just a farmer. He didn't look like a spy. He grew clover seeds. He ran a volunteer fire brigade. He painted landscapes and wrote poetry for his 2 young kids. Then, September 1939, Nazi Germany smashed into Poland. Pilecki fought bravely as a cavalry commander until Warsaw fell. But he refused to surrender. He went deep underground, co-founding the secret Polish army. By 1940, a silent horror appeared near the town of Oswiecim. The Nazis called it Auschwitz. At that time, it was a black box. No one knew what was happening inside. The resistance desperately needed intelligence. The High Command devised a plan that sounded like absolute madness. Send a secret agent inside. Have him get captured on purpose. Build an underground army from the shadows and smuggle out the truth. His commander asked for a volunteer. It was a clear death sentence. Pilecki stood up. He said yes. He took a real ID card belonging to a missing civilian named Tomasz Serafiński. His cover story? An ordinary, unimportant storekeeper. He wrote a final, cryptic letter to his wife, telling her not to try to rescue him. He said his work would bear fruit. On September 19, 1940, he stepped out into a massive Nazi street roundup in Warsaw. He walked straight into the trap. He got exactly what he wanted. 3 days later, September 22nd, the cattle cars arrived at Auschwitz. The brutality was instant. Guards pulled men out at random and shot them in the mud. It was designed to break their spirits before they even crossed the gate. Pilecki was stripped bare. His head was shaved. An SS guard knocked out 2 of his front teeth because he wasn't holding his prisoner sign fast enough. From that second, his identity was erased. He was no longer Witold. He was number 4859. He later wrote, "We were tearing the air into rags by quick movements of our hands." The average life expectancy for a new prisoner was just 42 days. Disease, starvation, and execution killed thousands every week. But while others were frozen in terror, Pilecki went to work. He studied everything: guard rotations, camp layouts, weak points in the fence. Within weeks, he started recruiting. He formed a secret network called the ZOW. To prevent betrayal under torture, he built it in tiny cells of 5 men. Each cell only knew their own members. If one cell fell, the rest of the network survived. He built an underground army, gram by gram, right under the noses of the SS. By December 1940, just 3 months after entering, Pilecki pulled off the impossible. He smuggled out his very first intelligence report. It was memorized by a released prisoner and sent directly to the Polish underground in Warsaw. By the spring of 1941, that report landed on desks in London. It detailed the mass executions, the starvation, the sheer sadism. The world elite read it, and they chose to ignore it. They thought it was wartime propaganda, but things were about to get much, much worse. Through 1941 and into 1942, Pilecki watched the camp morph into something completely unnatural. Auschwitz was no longer just a brutal prison. It was becoming a factory. Massive new brick structures rose from the mud. Huge chimneys began to dominate the skyline. Trains arrived around the clock from every corner of occupied Europe. Pilecki walked close to the construction sites. He counted the chimneys. He timed the arrivals. By mid-1942, he understood the horrific reality. These were gas chambers. These were high-capacity crematoria. He penned new, urgent reports. He detailed the selections on the railway ramp. He described how thousands of innocent people were marched into underground rooms and never came out. He calculated the math of the furnaces. He estimated that in those early years, up to 2 million people had already been turned to ash. His warnings were smuggled out through couriers and stolen radio parts, built inside the camp hospital. The data went to London. It went to Washington. The Allied leaders debated the files, but the scale of the slaughter was beyond human comprehension. They concluded his numbers had to be wild exaggerations. They called them impossible. They refused to bomb the rail lines. They refused to attack the camp infrastructure. They did absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, inside the fences, the trap was closing on Pilecki. By early 1943, the Gestapo began uncovering pieces of his secret network. His men were being pulled out and executed at the Black Wall, one by one. The underground army he spent nearly 3 years building was collapsing around him. No written report had worked. The world was deaf. Pilecki realized he had only one choice left. He had to break out, walk up to the high command in person, and make them look him in the eye. This brings us back to that stormy night of April 26, 1943. Pilecki had managed to get assigned to a night shift at a bakery outside the main camp fence. He had spent weeks tracking the guard habits. He knew there was a tiny, fleeting window of opportunity. When the guard turned his back to check a ledger, Pilecki and 2 accomplices struck. They unlocked the door, cut the telephone line to delay the alarm, and sprinted into the dark. For days they ran. They waded through freezing rivers to throw off the tracking dogs. They hid in deep forests. They wore stolen civilian clothes. Against all mathematical probability, they made it. Pilecki reached Warsaw in August 1943. He immediately met with the leaders of the Polish Home Army. He laid down his files. He gave his eyewitness testimony. He demanded a full-scale assault on Auschwitz, a massive military uprising, coordinated with Allied bombers, to free the prisoners. The High Command looked at the broken, exhausted soldier. Then they said no. The British and Americans would not provide air support. The plan was deemed a suicide mission. Pilecki had spent 947 days in the jaw of the beast. He had handed the world the first comprehensive proof of the Holocaust. And it wasn't enough. He wrote to a friend, "I tried to live in such a way that, when dying, I would rather feel happy than scared." He had survived Auschwitz. He was not yet done dying for Poland. The war dragged on to its bloody conclusion. In 1944, Pilecki fought like a demon in the Warsaw Uprising, watching his beloved capital get systematically burned to the ground by retreating German troops. He was captured again, spending the rest of the war in a POW camp. When the Americans liberated him in 1945, he finally sat down in Italy and wrote his masterpiece, the full, exhaustive account of his time as prisoner 4859. It remains one of the most vital historical documents ever written. That report was not published until the year 2000, 55 years after the war ended. Because for most of those years, it was illegal to speak Pilecki's name in Poland. Here is why. By 1945, Poland's nightmare hadn't ended. The Nazi uniform had simply been replaced by a Soviet one. A brutal, Moscow-backed communist regime took control of the country. They viewed the heroes of the Polish resistance not as liberators, but as dangerous political enemies. Pilecki was urged to flee to the West. He refused. He loved his country too much to abandon it to a second dictator. He went underground once again, gathering intelligence on Soviet atrocities, fake trials, and the secret execution of Polish patriots. He believed a free country was worth dying for. On May 8, 1947, the communist secret police struck. They arrested Witold Pilecki. They dragged him to the notorious Rakowiecka prison in Warsaw. For nearly a year, they subjected him to unspeakable, barbaric torture. They ripped out his fingernails. They broke his bones. They kept him in dark, water-filled cells. Yet, he never broke. He never gave up a single name from his network. During a final brief visit with his wife, Maria, he leaned in close and whispered a chilling truth. They killed me, because compared to them, Auschwitz was just a trifle. The trial lasted just 12 days, in March 1948. The regime wanted to humiliate him. They brought in a man named Józef Cyrankiewicz to testify against him. Cyrankiewicz was also an Auschwitz survivor, a man who had actually lived because of the very resistance network Pilecki had built. Now, he was a communist puppet, signing the death warrant of his savior. On March 15, 1948, the sentence was read: death. The president of Poland refused to grant a pardon. On May 25, 1948, at 9:30 p.m., Witold Pilecki was led into the basement of Mokotów prison. A guard stepped up behind him and fired a single heavy-caliber bullet into the back of his head. His final words were a defiant cry: "Long live free Poland!" He was 47 years old. But the regime wasn't satisfied with just killing his body. They wanted to murder his memory. They dumped his remains into a secret, unmarked pit somewhere in Warsaw. To this day, his physical grave has never been found. His wife was blacklisted, forced to work as a low-paid cleaning woman just to feed their children. His son and daughter grew up under a cloud of state suspicion, not learning the full, heroic truth of their father until the fall of communism in the 1990s. For over 40 years, the state enforced absolute silence. You could not write about him. You could not mention him in schools. The communists could not celebrate his anti-Nazi stance without explaining the horrific crime they committed against him afterward. He was completely erased from human history. It took until 1990 for the charges against him to be officially wiped clean. In 2006, Poland finally recognized him with its highest civilian honor, the Order of the White Eagle. It came nearly 60 years too late. Witold Pilecki volunteered for the darkest place on earth. He built an army in the shadows of the gas chambers. He pulled off an impossible escape. He screamed the truth until his voice bled. And in the end, the country he sacrificed everything to save was the one that pulled the trigger. Somewhere beneath the modern streets of Warsaw, his bones still lie in the dark. And Poland is still looking.